We see people join the webinar. Thank you for joining. We'll make a start at sort of 2 or 3 minutes past, just to make sure we're not missing any attendees as the late comers come in. So thanks for your patience. Right, as it's just coming up 2 minutes past, I think we'll make a swift start. So, as I say, thank you for joining us today. So, for this webinar, which is COVID-19 and economic geographies. Before we get started, I'm just going to run through the Zoom function. So we do have the chat open, but if you do have any specific questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and we've got a few sections in the schedule where we'll pick up some Q&As, and we've got a big sort of Q&A at the end where we'll cover off a lot of the different questions. So yeah, over to you, Cathy, to sort of introduce our panel and who we've got today.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Hello and welcome to our first IPM webinar of 2021. Pretty much 1 year ago, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, announced his first budget. It was the first budget of the Johnson-led Conservative government, the first budget since the UK had left the EU, and the first budget of the pandemic, although it was a few days until we were told it was a pandemic. In that budget, he said, now is not the right time to outline long-term plans. People want to see us focused on the here and now. And that revolved around £30 billion of spending that was budgeted for to protect against the coronavirus. According to the National Audit Office, the total cost of this spending is now 271 billion, and that's just figures up to the end of 2020. And so seeing as we're now well into 2021, I think we can safely say that the measures will have cost around about 10 times what the Chancellor foresaw. At the last budget, there'd been just 6 deaths. Yesterday, there was nearly 125,000 deaths within 28 days of a positive coronavirus test recorded on the government's COVID-19 tracking website. So whilst this time last year, the coronavirus seemed a type of theoretical risk, with the benefit of hindsight, the belief that it was in some way something that only happened was only happening in other countries now seems to be blatant exceptionalism. Everyone's been impacted. There'll be very few people, probably no one on this call, who's not lost someone to the virus. There'll be no one who has not had their life turned upside down in some way. So, with hindsight, again, the Chancellor's focus on the here and now was spot on. In the wake of such a crisis, even if he didn't foresee the scale and the costs. But now, as nearly 23 million people have had their first dose of vaccine, that's a third of the UK population, some end to the disruption is in sight. But what about the longer term consequences? And will some places and communities be impacted more than others? With me to explore the most recent budget announcements and their relevance to place managers, we've got 2 economists, Gregory and Spence, to look at how different places have been impacted and the forecast for them. We have Diane Wehrle. We're also going to discuss post-COVID consequences in place. And to do that, we have Buxton and Wehrle. Next slide, please, Tom. Here's the agenda that we're going to follow today. You'll see we've got two items, times that we can have questions and answers. So please use the Q&A to put a sort of formal question to the just put a question to the panelist, and you know, you use the chat if you want to say hi and make comments and so on. Next slide, please. As usual with our webinars, they attract continuing professional development points. This is important to all our professional members of the IPM. That's all of you on the call, to show that you're keeping up with all the latest trends and thinking in terms of place management and leadership. And as usual, we will log your points on your behalf. Okay, so let's first turn to the economy and budget. I'm really pleased to welcome Christian Spence and Mark Gregory. Christian's an academic colleague of mine here at MMU. He's a reader in economic analytics and is based within the Future Economies University Centre. He is head of Future Economies Analytics, a dedicated unit within the research centre focused on data analysis and visualisation, forecasting and modelling. Christian's also a fellow of the IPM. As a social science, it's always good to get the views of at least two economists. So we're also pleased to welcome Mark Gregory. Mark is a director at Centre for Towns, which is an independent non-partisan organisation dedicated to providing research and analysis of our towns, and is a partner of the IPM. Mark is also chief economist at EY for the UK and member of the UK government's trade advisory group on investment. Mark's got over 30 years experience as a business economist, working in over 40 countries, advising governments and industry on economics, policy and regulation. So thank you both very much for coming today. If I can turn to you first, Christian, what did you think about the recent budget? And you know, especially from a sort of place management and leadership perspective, was it good news for places, do you think?
I think there are some positive takeaways, and I'm conscious straight away that sounds like I'm couching everything in a veil of disappointment, at least at some level. I mean, the really big highlights of the budget were probably that we've seen some pretty hefty upward revisions to the economic forecast for the next couple of years. We've seen a pretty hefty downward revision to expectations of unemployment peaking later this year. I think that's probably the really big takeaway. So from the last forecast, when we had the late budget late last year in autumn, broadly the UK economy's performed marginally better than we expected. The big changes, you know, the big success here, and it's not just place, this affects the whole country really, is the vaccine rollout has just been, you know, essentially infinitely better than anyone might have predicted, and that's given all of us sort of looking forward for the economy this year a bit more optimism about how we think that's going to turn out. So essentially the idea that the economy starts to move back towards normal rather quicker than we thought before Christmas, so that's good news. In terms of place, there's some good stuff, but I think my challenge is it's not necessarily all that good. So we've got announcements around the Towns Fund, we've got announcements around the Levelling Up Fund, the Community Renewal Fund and the Community Ownership Fund. And the downside to all of this for me is it's just these lots and lots of separate individual pots of money that are all going to need bidding for. You know, some of these are going to be pots of money that you have to bid for to be able to bid for a different pot of money. And that kind of, for me, misses one of the big opportunities he had here, which was to set out something that looked a little bit more like a stable and long-term goal for levelling up and our towns, rather than just some piecemeal rehashes of the kind of schemes we've seen before.
Okay, Christian. Mark, anything positive for you? Anything to add to that?
I think Christian did well on the positives there to extract so many. I think I guess I suppose there were two other things worth talking about. You know, I do think the Chancellor has got better at giving away money, and actually it shouldn't be that hard to do, but he did find it very difficult for quite a period of time, which I think, you know, comes back to a kind of ideological sort of barrier there. But, you know, the short run support to the economy is now of the scale we might hope for in terms of both volume but also duration, and I think that really matters for places, because, you know, as we know, and I think, you know, we've shared data before, but certain places have been hit particularly hard. We think of Centre for Towns. When we looked at the first lockdown, 56% of all jobs in Newquay were in sectors that were shut down. So, those coastal towns, market towns have been hit. So I think the support and some of the, extra support for hospitality in terms of the VAT rate, etc., is really important for places. So I don't think it was deliberately targeted at places, but I think it will be beneficial. I guess the one thing I'm excited about, and clearly this is a geeky economist talking, so it's not excitement in the true sense of the word, but the sort of ability to write off 130% of capital expenditure could be really significant. As you heard, I'm on the tag for investment, and I do a lot of work in FDI. And whenever we talk to investors in manufacturing in particular, capital allowances rather than corporation tax are what drive their decisions. If you're making an investment in a new factory, the ability to write off that capital is really important. And again, from the work we've done with Centre of Towns, manufacturing remains disproportionately important to towns, to smaller places, to more remote places. That's their heritage, and actually manufacturing is still important there. In Hull, it's still 25% of economic activity. So I do think that programme could be really important if properly applied, but maybe we'll get onto that when we talk about some of the bad things in the budget, if you like. But I think those are maybe a couple of extra good things to start with. Yeah,
maybe a sort of a different view of you looking at things from a sort of national economic sort of perspective, picking up there, Mark, that some of these things will mean different things in different places.
Yeah.
And I know from discussions with members and listening into the conversations in the Bid Foundation, these things locally, some of these, the sorts of smaller, sort of short-term things are incredibly important for keeping those local economies going. The business rate holidays, restart grants, hearing that the furlough scheme is going to be extended, and that sort of package of what's needed is different depending on the sectors that are present in the locations. Okay, so a sort of short term, I think we're probably sigh of relief in the short term. I think from quite a few sort of place managers and leaders on some of those things. So let's pick up that again then with you, Mark. Did it go far enough, and are we doing what we need to do now to really have any chance of sort of bouncing back in a generation?
I think actually that that capital allowances point is a really good segue into what's missing, because for that to work you'd want a really effective industrial strategy, right, that would allow you to say, what capital investment do we want, where do we want it, and how might we go about getting it, rather than what's clearly happened is, it's been dreamt up as a policy, but there's nothing there. And if all it does is mean that businesses that would have invested anyway get the ability to write off against tax, then we don't really gain very much. So I do think, that the fact the industrial strategy is now being downgraded or removed or rebranded, depending on who says it, into Build Back Better, is, if you like, the first sign of this lack of a long-term plan, and I think what the budget did for me is it suggests there's neither a vision or a process by which we might get to realise that vision for places and for the levelling up story, and Christian talked about the multiple funds dishing out money, yet hidden in the budget is, call it austerity, call it, tight public spending, but they're probably going to take us more money out of places than those funds will put in. And there's a good chance some places won't get any put in because they won't, win sort of all the bids or whatever, and will just see themselves squeezed. So I do think, there's a gap there. There is clearly, what are we trying to do? We talk a lot about wanting to improve productivity as the way to improve places. Really, that is, can we get better jobs to places, higher paid, more secure jobs? Now, for me, the first question would be, where do we think they might come from? And then we might design policy to try and attract that, not just from the top down, but working bottom up. So I don't see any vision, any targeting, or any really way to make that happen. And I guess what was worrying for me in Build Back Better, the kind of 110 pages that went alongside the budget, because it still seems to be very focused on the city region model, which is if we can make a few of our bigger cities more effective, that will spill out everywhere. And that clearly doesn't work for everywhere. You know, there are lots of places not in city regions. We know from the Manchester story that the centre has tended to do disproportionately well, and I'm not sure we've had full trickle out. So again, I think I worry about that and the whole levelling up sense. I mean, other things I thought were just absent really were any convincing plan on the climate emergency. And again, that ought to be a big thing for place, because where will our wind farms go? Where will our carbon capture go? It won't go into the middle of London or Manchester. It ought to go into coastal towns or into places that have a strong manufacturing base. So, little bits of things there, not much money, not really much commitment. And then probably more worrying for me, the whole public finances. We're obviously having the dispute over nurses' pay, but no mention of social care. Really, I would say, implausible public finance forecasts in terms of how much money will need to go into health, what local authorities are lacking moving forward in the assumptions that underpin the public finances kind of hidden in the budget. And I think we've seen how important health is to places, that if you don't have a healthy population, that shows up both in the labour market, but also in the costs of social care and in the burdens on the local economy. So again, just a real lack of story there. And I guess the final thing, very relevant to what we're talking about here, no real strategy on tax, on rates, on how the online economy is going to be taxed and how it's going to be managed as part of the wider economy. I have a sort of view in my head that if we think of the burden that's placed on the roads, both motorways and local streets, costs of waste collection, the dislocation of employment in high streets. We haven't really ever looked at what the economics of online are from a policy point of view and thought about how best to design tax and other policies to support that. So I do think that there was a whole set of key issues at a macro level that affect places that just weren't there.
Okay, very comprehensive, Mark. Has he left you anything, Christian, in terms of picking up any other holes, do you think, or missed opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I think the relaunch of we'll call it positively, I suppose, a relaunch of the industrial strategy, where it has really been a wholesale abandonment and archive and a redraw. And the redraw has taken us back, I think, a few steps. Place was a late addition into the last industrial strategy, but it did become an addition, and it became almost the horizontal beams which sat across the 7 or so pillars, however many there were in that. And that was important because not only did that actually start to tie the national industrial strategy together at some form of understanding that there are spatial consequences, it also became the important drive for what every LEP in the country has just spent hundreds of thousands of pounds in 2 years doing, which is developing their own local industrial strategies. Where they go now from here is not yet clear. So I think that generally has just taken us back 2 or 3 years. It's going to take, even with the best will in the world, and if you were of the opinion that the new Build Back Better document is stronger and more useful than the last, that's not my position. It's going to take another 2 or 3 years now for civil service and civil society and local authorities and LEPs and bids to get their head around all this and reorient. There's precious time and money going to be wasted now while everyone starts to readjusting. And this has been a long run problem in UK political economy for centuries. It's got a lot worse, I think, over the last 3 or 4 decades. But this endless, the need that all governments feel to bin everything that's gone before and start again from scratch costs places a fortune. And I think that cost process, it's one of the reasons I become hugely frustrated with bid pot writing. I worked in local authorities many years ago. The amount of resource that will now be concentrated on trying to submit the appropriate 1,000 pages to Treasury to jump through the appropriate hoops and over the right hurdles to draw down what will be useful funds. But these are not funds which are going to start transforming places, and nor is there any gateway indication in any of this that there are more funds of a longer term, more sustainable nature coming down the pipeline. I think is really disappointing. I think this was really, not quite Sunak's last chance to do this. I think the comprehensive spending review this autumn is going to be his last chance. I agree entirely with Mark. The public finance forecasts that have been announced last week are going to need tearing up. The idea that we don't need any additional health spending to deal with the 1.5 million people on the waiting list, the idea that we don't need any additional education or skills spending to deal with the fact that all of our school, college and university students are now nearly a year behind. These are going to put long-term costs into the system over the next decade or so. And it's just implausible that he can not address all of this in autumn. And I think that really is the last chance. From a political point of view, I've always said one of the things with the red wall seats is natural political gravity is going to throw at least half of those seats away from the Conservatives at the next general election, just by the sheer everyone sort of returning to default. That next election is now at the most about 3.5 years away. If they, if even from a sheer narrow-minded sort of political point of view, if they want to do anything to try and retain some of those seats, they're really going to have to move extremely quickly indeed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that, you covered a lot there. Most of the people, I suppose, on the call are sort of interested in their local economies. Perhaps one of you could sort of pick up, what it means without an industrial strategy. Why do local economies need to be within a sort of regional strategy? What are the benefits, and are there any drawbacks to that? And going to this sort of Wild West approach that everyone bids for their own sort of their own parochial sort of district. Mark, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things neither Christian or I touched on, because I suspect we both think it's just window dressing, is the move of some of the Treasury to Darlington. But actually, I think it's a good, link to that question, Cathy, which is, if you were going to do levelling up properly, what you'd be saying is, if we use all of the resources in the country more effectively, we'll grow faster and we'll generate more income, and that will actually solve many of these problems of debt or help make them easier. And we've never got there. We've imposed top-down solutions, and I would argue moving some of the Treasury to Darlington is actually another top-down solution to a problem which should actually be, we need from the bottom up to identify what does everywhere need, and kind of come up with our national priorities from that basis. So where I think regions, or I think there's a layer between the very local and the central that we need. And if one way to address that would be move all of government into these regional or aggregation points, whatever we want to call them. Maybe region isn't the best, because I'm not sure always the northwest, southwest are the right models. You might need more than that or different ones. But I think places need to be able to have the support to develop their own analysis and plans, but that should be collaborative, not cooperative. And what we should be doing is trying to aggregate that up to a national level. So by the time we get to a national industrial strategy, the priorities are the ones that actually will do the most, generate the most benefit for the most places in the UK. So that would be my view of the world. Is, on that point Christian made about all the bidding or whatever, actually it should be a collaborative process that looks to kind of start from the bottom, but aggregate that up into a national view and a national consensus. But I see no prospect of that at the moment.
Maybe that's, the sort of failure, often of top-down policies, it leaves out the detail, and I suppose that again there'll be people on this call that will make this, make it work as best they can. We have a workshop in Derbyshire with Derbyshire County Council tomorrow. Exactly that, really, looking at these funds. What have we done? What have we already committed to as partners that makes sense for our economic region? And how do we take those forward under these new funding rules? So that's something, for everyone on the call really, is to regroup at local and sort of sub-regional, whatever level sort of makes sense in terms of looking at those funds. And perhaps that's something we can do in a future webinar, is pick up some of those funds and sort of talk about how they can, pick up some of the work that's already been done.
Yeah, and I think, and it might cut in different ways. So, it could be aggregate through a region, but it also might be all the coastal towns actually have similar needs. Or, for example, places in different parts of the country, kind of Lincolnshire, Herefordshire, whatever, there are predominantly agricultural economies. You might want them to work with DIT, trying to target foreign direct investors in that sector. So I think, geography doesn't have to be just kind of physical, or the networks don't have to be just co-location. They can actually be common interest as well. So, and I think that's where I see IPM and others really being able to inform that debate in a different way.
So just maybe if we can sort of sum up from both of you, your sort of prognosis for the economy, perhaps in the short and medium term, and whether you predict a sort of bit of a shift in economic geography. You talked about, Christian, a city sort of regional model not delivering for all places. And I'm sure that's something Mark, this director role of Centre for Towns, would sort of pick up. So where do you think we'll go from that? Does COVID do some of this levelling up just naturally from the sort of impact that it's having on people's behaviours?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity for some of it, for some of that. I mean, I think broadly, actually, I still, the OBR's upgraded its forecast this time. I still think they're slightly too pessimistic in the short term. I would expect a decent economic recovery across summer. I think where I differ from them is I think the last 5 or 10%, as it were, might take a very long time to come back. But having said that, that's a sectoral issue and that's a regional issue. So I think aggregate UK GDP will be okay. We'll hit sort of our February 2020 levels at some point mid next year. That seems perfectly plausible. In terms of kind of the spatial thing, I guess one of the things I'm thinking about at the moment is really what the next 6 months looks like. Now, a lot of this stuff is very hard to deal with, because a lot of this is going to be just how individuals react, how almost coercion from your peers, from your employer potentially. It's as an academic we get to live relatively free lives, but a lot of employees are going to be under pressure from bosses to return to city centre offices over the next 6 months. How much that happens will be a large determiner, I think, in terms of large urban centre recovery. The commuting, and again, I think this is sort of depending on your position. If you talk to people who are pro-home working, then their view generally is that no one's ever going to go back, and you might as well just demolish all of the city centre offices and turn them to parks. And if you talk to pro-office people, they say, no one's going to stay at home. The truth is, of course, is going to be somewhere between the two. But even if, a lot of the survey data is suggesting perhaps, about a third of the country can work from home, and about half of those would like to work from home about half the time. That's still taking about 12–13% aggregate footfall off our commuters into city centres, and essentially relocating that to where they live. That's a lot. That's an awful lot of, if we think a normal recession, of, sort of the 1990s scale, or even the global financial recession, these things which cause long-lasting effects are often only 4 or 5 percentage points of GDP. So there's a big opportunity, I think, in terms of how this thing evolves. But as I said, some of it will be quick. I think there will be a natural flow back for people just desperate to go to pubs, restaurants, cinemas, theatre, quite naturally. And I'm actually moderately pleased to see the Chancellor didn't put too many sort of demand stoking measures in on that side. I think broadly the public's desire will shape a lot of that on its own. There's a bigger issue around things like international tourism. If you're a centre, and of course in the UK, that's not necessarily just the big cities. If you're somewhere that attracts international tourism, then a lot of your potential footfall is going to be decreed as much by international governments' policy reaction and the ability to deliver as it is by the UK's. And that also affects our own tourism in terms of UK people going abroad. So I think there's still a lot of attention at the moment, people saying, well, as soon as we lift our restrictions, everything's fine. The question will be, how do other countries feel about that? How does the UK feel about our own citizens coming back from countries who may not have completed vaccination processes? Those things I think are positive for the UK, because that's likely to drive a bit of internal tourism in the UK, which will help to offset some of that large-scale international flow, which is likely to be depressed for at least the next 12 months or so, and possibly well beyond that. So I think broadly the outlook is good. I think the things I'd be thinking about if I were particularly smaller places, those who were more before COVID were traditionally sort of out commuting flow towns, providing residents to other places, and have on the whole benefited from some of that relocation, is you're going to be in increasing levels of competition with your urban centres over the next 12 months or so. They're going to be trying to poach the population that's temporarily stayed with you and take it back. So, you know, of all the people you now have in your smaller towns, there will be an increase in outflow of those people back to city centres. What we don't have any real sense at this stage is just what that scale is. And so from a place point of view, I think the big message for me is be ready for this. You know, if you're a city centre, you are going to see more people coming. If you're a more traditional, you know, outflow commuter town, you are going to see more people leaving. What are the messages you need to put in place? What are the things you need to develop in your own area, which helps you to take advantage of the positive things that are coming and potentially be ready to respond to some of those things?
Okay, it sounds a bit like we've got an economist telling us about place management and leadership here, so I'm going to cut you off there, Christian. Mark, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of sort of prognosis for the short and medium term?
So I'm like Christian. I think there is pent-up demand. Clearly some people have had a very difficult pandemic financially, but actually there is quite a bit of money that's been slushed away there, in savings accounts, and I think people will want to spend that. So I think it is more about the long term. What I'd say to places, and I think there is an opportunity, particularly for places that are not that close necessarily to the big urban centres, is can you play more effectively in the virtual economy? So again, with my FDI hat on, lots of tech businesses, 70% of tech FDI goes into London and the southeast. But as those businesses expand, presumably they'll want other people to work for them. But can you put together a proposition where maybe there's a light physical presence in your town, but there's actually a very good virtual offer that you have, which is partly around skills, maybe links to the universities there, around having good fibre, etc., and being linked into those businesses in London. So actually, we can think about moving from just a physical economy, which most of our economic policy is driven by, to this virtual economy, which we've seen can work at some level. So I think for some places that would be my challenge: is can you think of turning the different model to your advantage?
Thank you very much, and that's a good segue into hearing from Diane Wehrle. Diane's Marketing and Insights Director at Springboard and Senior Fellow at IPM. Diane's regarded as one of the leading experts on the high street, retail destinations, retail intelligence and insight, with unparalleled knowledge on current and emerging retail issues and trends, acquired from over 30 years experience in retail and retail property. So Di, I think you're going to pick up that idea of sort of, footfall, where it's been and hasn't been over COVID, and what your forecasts are for a bounce back and a return.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cathy. Tom, are you able to share? Thank you. I'm going to dive straight in and not give you information about Springboard, hopefully on the basis that you know who we are and you know what we do. Obviously, we track footfall across the UK, and so we've been able to identify the real impact of COVID on our retail places and our destinations. And this graph shows the trend in footfall from the beginning of last year, so week 1, 2020, all the way through to the end of last week. And the lines represent the different signature town types that we've identified with Cathy and her team through our 2-year project, our BDSU project. So it looks at comparison towns, which are towns that mainly focus on retail, holiday towns, which are clearly based around stays for holidays in places, multifunctional towns, which are towns that have a blend of use, retail, office, residential, and leisure. And the speciality towns, many of which we would probably regard as holiday towns, but these are the towns where, sorry, could you go back, Tom? Is that all right? Sorry, these are the towns where people come for day trips, and something interesting, and it's not just holiday towns. So interestingly, I always quote the example of Northampton is a speciality town because it has a degree of heritage about it. So we can see here the impact that lockdown had. And in the depths of lockdown 1, footfall in our comparison towns was 90% lower than in 2019, and even in the beginning of lockdown 3, it was nearly 81% lower. So you can see the severe impact that lockdowns had. And I think probably one of the bright spots around COVID, if there has been a bright spot, has been the fact that our smaller towns and cities, our smaller high streets, have been much more resilient than our bigger cities. And we would expect that, given the loss of our working population, the loss of tourism, and the loss of leisure and retail. And this hit our major cities and our big towns really hard. Our smaller market towns and our smaller high streets have done really well, really well comparatively. So as we work at home, we don't travel, we don't go away, we are using our local high streets more. So I think that the point made about, you know, losing footfall back to big cities, high streets had lost that trade and they've regained that trade. So yes, inevitably there will be some dilution of footfall as big cities reopen. But what we don't know, and hopefully we will see, is that people stay closer and more resilient and more loyal to local high streets than they once did in the past. Next slide, please. So here we look at the first 10 weeks of lockdown, both this lockdown, lockdown 3, which is shown in orange, and lockdown 1, which was shown in blue. And we've got both week on week and year on year percentage change in footfall. And the graph on the left shows week on week, and you can see lockdown 3, the weekly drops in footfall have been much lower than they were in lockdown 1. We are seeing much more activity. Sorry, Tom, you probably put back. Thank you. Much more activity this time than we saw in lockdown 1. And this flows through into the year-on-year change. You know, the decline year-on-year this time is lower than it was during lockdown 1. So despite lockdown, despite retail not being open, people are moving around, and more people are moving around than they were during lockdown 1. And I think we probably, if you go out on the roads, you will see that for ourselves. And next slide, please. This is actually my final slide, and here what I'm looking at is the forecast for footfall on reopening. So we're fortunate at Springboard because we have evidence of what happened during the first 2 lockdowns or after the first 2 lockdowns and when we reopened. So we know what happened then, and therefore we can use that information and that data to extrapolate what may well happen after lockdown 3. And in fact, what we're focusing for high streets is a big uplift in footfall in the first week after lockdown ends. So from Sunday the 11th of April, which is actually my birthday, through to the following Saturday, we're expecting and forecasting an increase in footfall of 59% from the week before. I mean, that is very significant. It's bigger than the uplift we saw after the end of lockdown 1 and lockdown 2, but there are 2 reasons for that. One is that we're actually opening outdoor hospitality at the same time as non-essential retail this time. And we didn't do that last time. We opened retail and then 2 to 3 weeks later, we opened outdoor hospitality. So we're going to see people coming into our high streets and into our towns, not just to shop, but to eat and to drink. And of course, it's April. The weather hopefully will be warmer. It certainly was last year. And I think the pent-up demand that we're seeing, and we're seeing this pent-up demand through these smaller declines early on, but actually over the last 7 weeks, we've seen continuous week-on-week increases in footfall. So there clearly is pent-up demand amongst the population to go out and about. And you know, we're seeing this week-on-week increase, and haven't got any stores open. So the minute things open, we will be going back to the high street, and that is helped by outdoor hospitality. Secondly, shoppers are likely to feel safer, because we're used to wearing masks now. Back in lockdown, after lockdown 1, masks were completely new to us all. You know, we went back into retail destination initially without wearing masks. Then we were told to wear masks in July. And of course, that made some people feel very nervous and very uncomfortable just having to wear a mask. We're now used to that, and we actually feel safer. And of course, the vaccine program has been such a success that 1/3 of all the UK's population has already been vaccinated. So by the time we get to April and May, that will increase, and so people inevitably feel safer. And finally, as I've mentioned, this lockdown fatigue. So what we've seen is these continuous increases in footfall week on week over the past 7 weeks. And that, you know, given the fact you can't actually go anywhere other than a food store or a pet shop or a garden centre, and these rises are both in retail parts where we have high street, where we have food stores, shopping centres where we only have essential retailers, and high streets. given that we've seen that, it's demonstrating that there is an element of lockdown fatigue. People want to get out and about, and therefore we're likely to see a great uplift when we reopen. So in terms of how that's going to impact on year change, when the peak of footfall after the opening after lockdown 1, we got to 25% below where we were the previous year. We will probably get to a figure in excess of that. We will probably get overall to about 20%, maybe 17% below, maybe even higher. But that includes retail parks, and retail parks have been more resilient than high streets. But generally, we're expecting quite a significant bounce back. Back to you, Cathy.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a point there that Emily's raised as a question, that the figures, so they're predictions for all UK destinations, but the dates, the roadmap dates there that you've mentioned are England only ones. So
they are, but I must tell everyone that when the thing about the UK is that the overall footfall for the UK is driven very much by England. Just the weight of population and the weight of footfall is in England's favour. So there are relatively small amounts of population in devolved nations. So when we look at the UK, it is England that will drive that. But yes, you're right. It is the dates are the England dates, but actually these are UK predictions.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. And I mean, I think, when you showed those town types, I mean, obviously beyond, although that's the sort of dominant sort of pattern there's lots of different reasons why people go to all of those places. And that's maybe something, we've sort of seen about the changes sort of in the large cities, although that affects footfall, the type of things that people are doing when they come into city centres commuting, it may be more the convenience, multifunctional footfall that's affecting. So we might see some less spas and Tesco metros, but I can't imagine there's going to be a sort of, opera house and ballet in every neighbourhood centre. So there's different attractors.
Absolutely, Cathy. Yeah. Well, I think what we're going to see is some real changes in the pattern of activity in different types of towns. So for years and years and years, we've had a very stable pattern of activity with a very a very continuous performance of our Monday to Friday periods, with a peak at lunchtime because people go out from their offices for lunch. Saturday is a higher, and Sunday tends to be half of Saturday. And that trend has prevailed, whatever type of town. But actually, I think because we've had such a structural shift in the way we live and the way we work, it is likely that those patterns of activity will vary. So we may not see peaks at lunchtime everywhere, because there will be less working population. We might see a peak in early evening because, and on certain days, because people may tend to come into the office 2 or 3 days a week. And on those days of the week, they may use the city centre or the town centre more actively, and therefore go out possibly for a meal or to the cinema in the evening. So the footfall in the evening period may be higher than it was previously. And Saturday may be even more important, as may Sunday be, because they can't get to the city centre so readily during the week if they're working at home.
Okay, we've had a question in about your view on pent-up demand for the high street. I think there's something that you mentioned, Christian. Is it real or myth?
I take sort of two ideas. This is maybe the one main area I think where I disagree with our other economist colleague. So I think that there's two things here. I think, is the public desperate to get back out and actually re-engage? Without question. I think that there'll be lots of those, particularly those who are vaccinated, by the time all this opens, who will be very keen to get out. I think as the footfall forecasts show, that still doesn't mean, however, we're going to be seeing more people. We're going to be seeing pre-COVID normals. I think we're still some way away from all of that. But there is demand there. The second aspect, though, I think, is about this pile up of cash. So there's about 180 billion been saved over the past 12 months or so into bank accounts and unspent. What happens with that? I'm less optimistic that is going to be used to really drive spending. The Bank of England did a survey which suggested similar, which depressingly suggests about 50% of that is probably going to end up in assets and houses, rather than in retail spend, and that the unwinding of that is probably pretty slow. And that would be my feeling too. On the whole, goods spending has held up during the COVID crisis. It's been transferred online or to those local shops which are open. But the big thing that's missing is services, and services you can usually only do face to face, and there's probably only a number that there's a maximum number of them you can have. You know, people aren't going to catch up on the number of meals they haven't had over the last 12 months. They're not going to catch up on the haircuts they've not had, much as I could do with getting mine booked in. I think those are challenges. So I don't see much. I don't see that saved money unwinding onto the high street, but I do see there being a desire by enough people to get back out and reactivate that will provide some useful economic activity.
Yeah, and certainly got the evidence from when restrictions were lifted, showing that, you know, that the sort of those sort of everyday sort of type spends and services, you know, are very popular again. Anything to add there, Mark? Do you
yeah,
what's being pent up?
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing, and Christian sort of touched on it there, is what the shape of that spending will be. And, you know, and I don't think we'll know for a while. So to give you a slightly different example, so one of EY's clients is a cereal manufacturer, breakfast cereal, and their sales have been up 30% during lockdown because we've all been eating breakfast at home rather than on the go. So, you know, for them, they actually don't know if that's a permanent thing. You know, if everyone's been eating Rice Krispies, they now like them so much they're going to eat them forever, or actually they never want to see another cornflake in their lives. And, you know, how much will people go back to work? What will the travel pattern do to that? So I think it'll take us quite a while, both as individuals and as businesses, to decide what our patterns of behaviour are going to be and actually how we respond to that. So I think part of the reason the pent-up demand won't necessarily be everything is because, you know, people will be sort of trying different models as well. And so I think it will take a while. And actually, some places won't be open, you know, probably will run out of stock or whatever it will be. So I think it'll be quite clunky and probably take 6 months before we've settled back, before people feel, yes, my job is safe, whatever it might be. So, you know, I think part of this, people will save because they're uncertain. Businesses probably won't rush to invest because they're uncertain. So I think it will take a bit of time. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to take one last question with you, Di, because I know you have to leave, so you can't be on the end panel. From Nicola Grant, how much of footfall is commuters? Is it measured separately? We have a very busy train station with people commuting into London, which has obviously not been the case. Therefore, the footfall being measured to use the town centre is different. Wondering how commuters, or the lack of them, might skew their sort of town centre figures.
I mean, what we're doing at the Springboard is measuring the activity within the high street or the town centre itself, not necessarily any commuter destination. So we're not measuring footfall at train stations or tube stations. But of course, if your high street is very much a function, and activity in the high street is very much a function of people coming out of the tube station and then going along the high street, of course, that inevitably will be impacted. But interestingly, what we found over the last year is that outer London centres, which of course are huge commuter belts for central London, have actually weathered the storm much better than central London has, because people are working from home, they're living close to those high streets. Although they may be commuters into London normally, they're not at the moment. So the stations may be very quiet, but actually the suburban town high streets in London have actually been relatively resilient. And that's because of the working home scenario. So there is a difference, but, you know, the commuters are shoppers and commuters are town centre visitors. And so if they're not going into the train station, they actually will maybe well going into the high street more. Okay, thank you very much. So thanks to our first panelists there. And I know you have to leave, Di, but Christian and Mark, hopefully you can stay to our final panel at the end. If you've got questions relating to those presentations or the ones you're going to hear, please do put them in the Q&A. So now we're going to turn to the impact of COVID at a local scale in particular places. I'm delighted to welcome both Kay Buxton and Neil Wehrle to the second part of the webinar. So first of all, we're going to hear from Kay. Kay's an Executive Director at the Paddington Partnership, a position which she's held for more than 20 years. Kay works across both Marble Arch Business Improvement District and Paddington Now BID, both members of the BID Foundation and partners of IPM.
Kay's the chief exec, I should say, at the Marble Arch Bid and executive chair at Paddington now. Kay's also a member of IPM. So Kay, I think you're going to tell us a little bit about...
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So yes, I head up Paddington Partnership, which is the development area at Paddington, Marble Arch Bid and Paddington Now Bid. So we cover the area from Little Venice all the way down to Oxford Street, and I'm going to take you through my own personal journey of COVID and some of the sort of really local issues that we have flagged and that we're looking at. So we're going to cover, you know, what Central London, obviously, what really is happening in Central London. Have people left Central London? Will people come back? All the issues that Christian and Mark were talking about as well around those commuters, and how we're using data. What data do we have? How important data is, and what do we do with it? How do we use it? I'm also going to quickly cover F&B and leisure. We're noticing a much more agile F&B than retail. I got some eyebrows when I mentioned that on the pre-meet for the panel, but I'll show you why and some of the behaviour of local F&B and how that's really helped our high street. Covering the great outdoors, al fresco, obviously really popular, but that carried on right into December, and what happens this year and how that copes with residential pressure, pushing back in the opposite direction, and some thoughts on that. And then around public realm, we've all been through the sort of the rethinking of the public realm and how we accommodated social distancing and how we accommodated more use of outside space. Is it here to stay? And some thoughts on that. Starting off with some pictures. Most of these are pictures, so no, this is Oxford Street, obviously, for those who recognise it, at Easter last year, where I went to give blood, and I stood in the middle of Oxford Street and took my own pictures. And obviously we're all familiar with that. We're all familiar with boarded up pubs. This is a Paddington pub. This is a very empty, apart from one person, sadly, Paddington station. So none of that is news to us, and what we're obviously all used to. So none of that are any scenes that are any surprising, but all very shocking when we think back to 12 months ago when those footfall, that first footfall chart that Diane showed as well, really telling in terms of how it dropped off initially. For us, a lot of this is around our data and how we're using it, and some of the work we're doing at the moment. So just some of this data is just around Edgware Road, to just use one example. But looking at our addressable audience, we know how many residents we have, and we know most of them are in the more affluent region of 21,000 people live within 5 minutes walk of Edgware Road, and we have banks, chemists, and supermarkets. So actually, our footfall stayed pretty strong at about 60 to 80%, whereas you just saw Oxford Street. So very, very different. 133,000 employees work within 5 minutes of Edgware Road or on Edgware Road. So back to that whole point about commuters, we're vulnerable on the workers, and then we have 1.1 million annual tourist visits to the area and staying in hotels, again within the boundary of our bid area. We know that for us, tourism generates 583 million, but 78% of that is international. And we do have that breakdown of international versus domestic. So yes, domestic, we're encouraging domestic first as far as possible, but we are very reliant on tourism, as reliant on tourism as we are on the office sector. We know that 36% of our ground floor is F&B, which is one of the highest percentages in any sort of town centre. Retail is only 24%, so F&B is much bigger than retail, and we know that that's got the highest merchandise mix of the sort of central London. If you just look at Oxford Street, it's got 11% F&B on the ground floor. We've got 26%, and we know that therefore 50% of our addressable spend is towards our F&B. So for us, one of the big questions is around the role of food and beverage, leisure, I suppose. And the ability of that to show some agility, and the ability of that to show up the high street. And that's one of the big questions for us around our food sector. The other big issue around data is around lease lengths. We've just not long off commissioned a piece of work which was looking at lease lengths, so the timing of this was impeccable. But we do have, just on the bit that we cover on Edgware Road, 214 ground floor commercial units, and 30 of those are up before 2016, and another 30 of those within 10 years, and some of them not just between 5 and 10 years. So some of those in the 6 and 7 year mark, and they're in blocks. Obviously, they're in blocks. So potentially we are looking at redevelopment of various blocks, and it'd be interesting to see what happens. On the office side, we've got, as well as little bits of upper floor offices, we've got 6 multi-let office buildings, and 3 of them have less than 5 years on leases. So what we're seeing already is either them going to the market, or redevelopment proposals coming forward a little bit earlier. We're seeing companies by themselves or out of leases that are coming to an end. So, and a developer basically bringing forward a redevelopment because now is a good time to do the redevelopment. So we're seeing those being a little bit fast tracked, and I'm sure that maybe Neil, who follows me on the property side, may cover that around what we're seeing in the property sector of people bringing those forward. It may be, again, what sort of redevelopment will be on the edges of cities, on the edge of the West End. Will it be in favour of residential? Will we have more mixed use schemes? Will we see more hotels? What does this mean for our high street? So a big data issue. I mentioned F&B, and I think this is partly the language that food and beverage is using at the moment, and the character of F&B and how well. If you just think through who made the news in terms of F&B over the course of the pandemic, and how they sort of led the charge, really more so than retail in terms of coming back and welcoming back. And then Class E, will we see more F&B occupying former retail units, and will they have an easy, will it be an easy route for them? And for us, will this save the high street? And just some sort of images of this. This is a monocle cafe. So I went around taking photos of all our messaging from F&B, because it was actually much stronger and more jovial and more playful. And the narrative and the tone of it was actually really well done on all of our F&B. These are in Paddington. Miss you soon, see you soon, opening party. Obviously, we all know Brewdog hit the news about 15 times during the pandemic for various reasons, but again, got the messaging right. Vinoteca telling it like it is, boarded up door, but we deliver wine. Very different from some of the other retailers who shut the door and say closed due to government restrictions. So very different messaging we saw from our between the two. And again, here, a small coffee shop in Paddington with a little library outside, a sign, everything's going to be okay, little Paddington in the window. It's all, these are these relatively small units, but actually really keeping some of these sections alive and making a difference. And I think one of the interesting things for us is we're still having F&B open. This is a French deli that's open during this lockdown. So they've opened since the beginning of January. And doing a rowing trade with a bunch of tulips outside. So a real interesting set of behaviours really in some of these smaller food and beverage and sort of hospitality outlets, much more characterful, I suppose, than retail. And then the next question, obviously, around the outdoors. We've all experienced probably al fresco. We all leapt to al fresco in July when we could. There are tensions. Westminster have done an amazing job on al fresco and hospitality package. They've relaunched it again, ready for April. There is pushback from residential areas where these are operating in clusters. Some of the residents locally are saying things like, what if, surely if they can open from May, we only need to offer al fresco from April and May, and after that we take the table chairs away because we can't cope with the noise late at night and those sorts of issues. But there is a question around customer sentiment and whether we still want to sit outdoors and whether we'll still feel safer outdoors than indoors. And just some examples really of this. This was again a Westminster scheme in Seymour Place on the Portman Estate with a road closure. This is Paddington. This is December. This is really interesting. So we've got all this outside seating with heating. We've got a load of floating restaurants in Paddington. We've got boat trips all operating in December, and all people still eating out in December. So we all thought al fresco wouldn't work. Well, it'd never work in this country because our weather is so poor and it rains a lot and people can't cope with the cold. But actually, we saw it go right up until London going into Tier 4 in Paddington and Marble Arch. We had floating cinema. This is boats. We have hire boats at Paddington. Along the canal, this is boats and open air cinema, and you've got blankets and you can order little hot toddies, and it worked. It absolutely worked. And we found new ways of delivering projects. So very interesting. Our boats, who normally close after October half term, stayed open until Tier 4 restrictions came in, and they were sold out every day. We had people on boats on the canal in the middle of December. So that was really interesting. And they made back the money they lost in the summer, which I don't think anyone was expecting. But again, we wanted to be outdoors. We wanted to enjoy it. This is December. You can see a little Christmas tree here. This is again a queue. No wonder we went into Tier 4. This is a queue for al fresco, for Winter Wonderland sort of alfresco at Pergola in Paddington. And this is people queuing to get in December with their bobble hats and boots. So again, you know, we're not in any way put off by the weather, and it has been really successful. Another one of our floating restaurants is the fish restaurant. They did fish takeaway as well during successive lockdowns, and they were able for the first time ever to put outside seating there. It got refused previously, but obviously during COVID it was consented, and the hope is that this will continue, and I think it'll be really interesting if it does continue. But they are under residential pressure. There are residential blocks about 4 foot to the left of the edge of that photo, so really interesting to see what happens there. And then on public realm, this was a car park. So a change in sentiment. This was a car park and it's now beach volleyball, and it worked really well. And it was raining when I took that. There's a net in the picture, so sorry about that. But again, we were much more creative with our space, and we activated our spaces in very, very different ways. And we did tiny little projects like, let's turn a car park that no one's using into a beach volleyball court, and people came and played beach volleyball. But you know, there is an issue. You know, we have floating bus stops, we have widened pavements, we have school streets, we have low traffic neighbourhoods, and you know, we have loads of issues around how the public realm was adapted, and it was all put through on emergency measures. You'll all have been through that. But the big question is obviously, do we have a short memory on that, and will it return to how it was? Or will we retain that interest and affection for the public realm that we gained and appreciated? My last question, I'm just asking loads of questions, I'm not answering any of them. My last question, just around repurposing really, and to end for us on this was, some of you may know, etc. venues obviously do as it says, training and conference venues have been completely deserted since March, and they're now one of our mass vaccination centres. We did have a chat as a panel actually about the extent to which, if we are looking at continuous vaccine rollout on a roll-on, roll-off basis for years to come, where are these venues going to be? Because currently they're in venues that can't operate, but we need to find spaces for these venues potentially in the long term as we reopen gyms and reopen hotels and reopen sports arenas and museums, and we'll still need vaccination sites. So just an interesting thought at the end.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Kay. I'm going to go straight to Neil, if that's all right, to pick up perhaps some of those things that Kay was talking about from a property perspective. Neil Wild is director and owner of Wild Property Consultancy, which he set up in 2008. He's a qualified chartered surveyor with more than 30 years property experience. Wild Property Consultancy has retained and developed a wide range of national and locally based property owning and leasing contacts and clients. Neil's also a high streets task force expert and, of course, a member of IPM. So over to you, Neil.
Thanks so much, Cathy. Great introduction. What more can I add to that? That's really helpful. Been a really interesting hour so far. Do stick with it. I've got 10 minutes to talk about challenges and opportunities for the property sector, which I will aim to do with my allocated time. And then there's plenty of time for questions afterwards. I will have to be brief, and I will give some generalizations, and I'll probably give some wrong impressions just because of speed. So do pick me up and ask me questions afterwards. As Cathy said, I am a chartered surveyor. I'm a commercial property agent, place manager. I'm Oxfordshire based, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the trends that I've identified recently over the last 12 months in particular that are impacting our towns and in particular our property. And at the end of my talk, I will give an introduction to a very brief intro summary to what Meanwhile in Oxfordshire is all about, which is a local enterprise partnership funded scheme across the whole of Oxfordshire, which is really exciting, and I'm one of the delivery partners. Contrary to what Cathy said, unless she's promoted me, I'm only a mentor and facilitator with the High Streets Task Force due to my lack of a master's degree, but that's something that Cathy and Tom and others are working on in terms of encouraging me. So let's move on in terms of the next slide. Let's see if we can get the next slide going. That would be perfect if we can. Why is that not doing that? bear with me as I try and get the next slide on. I'm looking at the impacts on supply and demand and assessing what those are. I'm not able to share to move screen, unfortunately, so there's a hitch here. Blame my office for that. That's my issue. Tom, perfect. Thank you, Tom, for intervening perfectly. Thank you. So impacts on supply and demand. What are those impacts? What is impacting us? And what are we doing about it? So national factors. What are those national factors that are impacting supply and demand for property? Planning policy changes. We've heard a little bit about that recently. And changes to the use classes order, permitted development rights. I can't go into details on those, but generally I think, and there's some controversy to this, but I think those are positive changes that the government have brought in. Opening up the use class order has helped my job tremendously when showing people around town centre property and them asking me, can we use this as a cafe serving hot food? Yes, you can, and now without the need for planning application. So that, for example, is really positive. Property investors and developers are very excited about permitted development rights, and there are permitted development rights for change of use from retail. However, there are sufficient, I believe, kind of criteria around that to limit that without having a detrimental impact. Local factors. Well, your place-based strategy is a really important impact on property. It makes the place popular, interesting. That has an impact on whether businesses want to be there. And so that has a huge impact. The work you're doing on promoting, your economic support for businesses, all of those different aspects make a huge difference on the place. So those factors influence and impact property, and I can't underline enough the way that the local place-based strategy connects with property. It's got to. Just going back to the business rates, because I skipped over that, not because it's too controversial, but it's important to mention it. Business rates, again, huge discussions about changing the way business rates works. I can't imagine that that's going to happen in the short term, unfortunately, but there are some positives about the business rates regime. Small business rates relief is a massive factor that impacts property. So property of a certain size under a rateable value of 12,000, that is where huge demand is from property occupiers. So the small business rates relief scheme, which has been a long term and hopefully will be a long term into the future. It's not a COVID related scheme. Small business rates relief is a brilliant scheme. The problems really with business rates is the lack of regular reassessments on rateable values. That's really the problem. We move on to the next slide, looking at recent trends, and I mean very recent trends, on top of the larger, longer term trends that have been impacting towns. I think, and this is what I'm noting from consumers, a popularity for locally rooted businesses, an appetite for food-based businesses. There's a clear trend in society for a need for positive health, good health, fitness and well-being, a determination to boot the commute, and I'm going to thank my friends at Town Square Spaces who have come up with that expression. So our desire to avoid the drive to work, and I think that will continue. And there is a substantial amount of investor wealth. Now, that was referred to earlier. I don't mean in terms of spending money in our towns. I mean by property investors and developers who want to invest their wealth in an asset, so in a property. So what does that mean? So let's move on to the next slide. So here's a nice summary. What's in demand, what's oversupplied, and what to look out for. So in my experience, and my experience is Oxfordshire based, but this I think is repeated in other locations beyond Oxfordshire, a high demand from occupiers for small shops, so businesses looking to lease or own small properties. Very high demand, and that comes back to the rateable value, the small business rates relief aspect, low overheads. There's a high demand for freeholds with opportunities. So anything that comes up for sale, freehold for sale in a town centre, attracts an awful lot of interest if it's priced correctly. And those people interested are looking at development opportunities, change of use opportunities, opportunities to break up a large unit building into smaller parts. And so there's a high demand for those types of property. There's an oversupply of what I call multiple size shops. So shops that would traditionally have been occupied by multiple retailers, particularly those in pedestrianised locations, and particularly those that don't lend themselves to being reduced in size. An oversupply of traditional indoor shopping centre units, which also don't lend themselves to change of use, are very regular in size and shape, and just we have a lot of them. Although of course there's loads of examples of where those are changing and becoming other types of uses, but generally speaking, an oversupply. In my local town, I would say 20 to 25% of the available units in our town at the moment are in the shopping centre. Watch for mixed use properties or properties that give that opportunity on town centre fringes. Moving on. So opportunities, these trends, these aspects that I've shared there are creating these opportunities. These are opportunities for us as place managers for our town centres. So in order to take advantage of these opportunities, we do need a clear understanding of our property in our towns through regular property assessments, property audits, and understanding of availability and a breakdown of that availability of property into different types and sizes. So there are these 5 opportunities that I've highlighted here. 1, to develop a thriving independent retail sector. Opportunities for what I call hubs, which might be co-working, might be office hubs, might be community spaces. Opportunities for mixed uses, enabling towns to become much more than simply retail destinations. Opportunities for property conversions and developments, and that might be small scale individual properties or larger scale developments. And there are opportunities for local interventions. And just in my final minute or two, I'll give you an example on the next slide of a local intervention taking place across Oxfordshire at the present time. This was launched start of February. I believe it's unique. It's utilising money from the government's Getting Building Fund through the Local Enterprise Partnership, and it's been commissioned by all of the Oxfordshire district councils. That's 5 district councils across Oxfordshire have commissioned this project, and it's to leverage 1.69 million of money between now and January 2022 to impact empty town centre, urban centre properties across the whole county. It's a really exciting project which myself, Makespace Oxford are the lead, and others are involved in delivering over the next 10 months. So in conclusion, we move to my final slide, thank you. Understand your local property context. It's key that you do that, and it's so important. A place-based strategy which ignores the property is not, in my opinion, a place-based strategy. And assess as a town, as a place, how you can intervene into the property that your town has, and as a town, as a collective, you can, I believe, make a difference. Thank you. Sorry for the issues at the start there, but thank you, Tom, for assisting with those slides.
You managed really well. Thanks, Neil. Okay, so there's actually been quite a lot of debate. Questions come in. I'm gonna try and group them. I'm going to start picking up something that Neil said there at the end about this innovative schemes and attracting new uses. It's a question from Nicola Torkington. A lot of what Neil's mentioned about recent trends aligns with social enterprise strategy. What are your thoughts on potential growth for social ethical businesses and creating profit for wider purposes, we build back better. So, you know, in your schemes that you're looking at, that, you know, are a lot of these sort of meanwhile uses and
Yes.
sort of new entrants, community and social enterprises?
Yes, absolutely. So the lead delivery partner, Make Space Oxford, is a community interest company. So the Oxfordshire councils have appointed a community interest company to deliver the 1.69 million, which I think speaks volumes there, and their key ethos and what they've done in Oxford already has really built upon other social enterprises supporting artisans, independent businesses, small businesses. So very much part of that here, and I believe that's not simply part of the Meanwhile in Oxfordshire project. That's a clear, significant amount of demand for properties coming from those types of businesses and organisations.
It's got to be more than meanwhile, though, surely. I mean, this may be to our economists.
Yeah.
You know, where do we value? You know, there's been a lot of ambition about you know what places, how different places can be. How do we value that in economic sense? In an economic sense, is that, you know, if we've got people that are creating social value and wealth, you know, where does that fit into your world as economists? Either of you. Thank you, Christian.
Sorry, hunting for the mute button. I see Mark's unmuted too, so we'll give him a go in a minute. I think the challenge for us is with difficulty. I think, you know, frameworks for measuring social value and you know, coming up with economic valuations for that have been emerging. You know, the work the government did around sort of Social Value Act back in 2012, I think, sort of started some of those conversations. But as economists, it's early days. The conversation is moving rapidly. There's, you know, a lot of academic debate now in the post-GDP sort of world. How do we start to better account for things that don't involve GDP? I still think it's still challenging, though. So Mark will probably have some other opinions on this, but the challenge for alternative measures is they tend to correlate with GDP really well, and so it's not perfect, but it works. But Mark, if you
so GDP ends up being a proxy for some of the things that you're trying to measure. Yeah. Okay, Mark.
No, I think it is right, you know, and you know, health is a really good example. I think what we've seen with mental health in the pandemic is, you know, we probably didn't realize how important it is, or quite, you know, how much we should almost spend to ensure whatever level of mental health we think is appropriate. So I think it is a challenge. I think, you know, GDP is being challenged on all fronts in this pandemic, if you like. I saw the state of New Jersey haggling with New York for a bigger share of the local tax take, because people who are nominally working in Manhattan actually live in New Jersey and haven't been to Manhattan for sort of 12 months, right? So, you know, I think for places now, kind of where is value really being created, not just social value, but, you know, kind of old economic value is going to be really hard to think about. And you could think, if we did have local income taxes, that would be an issue here as well. So I think all of these issues probably, you know, a better way of measuring that reflects place is probably what we need.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got some quite sort of technical questions. I think probably address those at UK. I'm not sure if you can have a quick look in the chat, road closures and parking and things like that. But I'm going to just take some broader issues first before we come back to those ones. And I'd be interested, you know, thinking about your levy payers, Kay, you know, when there's these wider ambitions now that we talk about places, you know, more social sort of equity, greener economies, and so are those ambitions reflected in your levy payers, would you say, Kay?
Yeah, I think in those who are in for the long term, definitely. I think, you know, we're very fortunate. We've got good sort of property owner stock locally. There are a couple of ones that are overseas and that we don't have much contact with, but the majority of them are, you know, Portman Estate, church commissioners. So we've got strong landlord leadership and vision, and you know, for Marble Arch, for example, we join Oxford Street, so obviously that Westminster Council with the Oxford Street vision as well. So there is a sort of underlying strategy and vision. I think from a levy payer perspective, it does depend what sector. Some sectors are very short term, and I think, we've just been through ballot, and there's always nothing like a reminder of the value of the bid, is there, and then having renewal conversations. But some people who say, well, I'm not going to be here in 2 years' time, so there's no point in me voting, and those sorts of difficult conversations. And I'm not interested in what's over there. I'm only interested in what's outside my front door. And I'm sorry, that's parochial, but the road isn't very clean. Or, so you've got quite parochial approaches sometimes from large organisations. And then you've got some taking a really long-term view, and it does depend. I think it does depend on the personality sometimes as well that you're in front of. But we have seen it reflected. We have seen people investing in the area and people playing. We asked a lot of people to vote while they were locked down. We asked a lot of pubs and restaurants to vote while they hadn't been open for a year, and they could see it. They could see the long-term value of the bid, even though they haven't paid the bid levy for this year, and they won't be paying the bid levy for next year till about probably July, but they can see the value of having the bid there and being part of it. So yeah, if I answered your question.
Thank you. Yeah, interesting from Ros Lloyd-Williams here. I think for you, Neil, but it might be something that you've seen too, Kay. Do you see a trend in businesses thinking strategically and economically, collaborating with other businesses to share businesses, premises and concessions? We've got some examples in Manchester, but it's an efficient way of using space, isn't it? A cafe during the day and then a restaurant in the evening. Is that something you're seeing, Neil?
I think it's a great way of dealing with very large properties or medium-sized properties which are problematic in their in getting occupancy. There's been a lot of food stores coming into town centres, independent style food stores, supermarkets coming into town centres, taking some of the large spaces. But sharing use is brilliant. The Meanwhile use project I outlined is encouraging that shared use that can be done. It needs a kind of intervention from the landlord, really, to kind of give permission for the different businesses using the space at the same time. Sometimes that has been a problem and a barrier, but I think it's great, and the more of it, the better.
Have you seen any of this, Kay?
Yeah, well, interestingly, I think the thing that we're working on with Westminster Council at the moment is that they've got a big pop-up programme they're trying to roll out across the city with a number of pop-ups in each bid. And bearing in mind there are lots of bids in Westminster. And I think one of the really interesting bits, exactly Neil's point about how complicated some of these units are to put pop-ups in and meanwhile uses in. And the reason they're complicated vacant units, that's why they're still vacant, is they're very complicated. So either held with administrators, or they're held as part of an overall development where someone is packaging up for an overall larger development. And you'll see, vacant units and gradually leases, and then when the whole lot is ready. So we another example is we've got one empty former bank. I'm sure you all know what former banks. Those corner buildings, former bank with guardian tenants in, and we'd love to do something in that building. But we can't get anywhere near it, and we're not likely to be anywhere near that in terms of being able to activate that space. But we're really keen with Westminster, and they're appointing a sort of a provider for it, to look at sort of experiential pop-up. So definitely not just vinyls, which is equally as complicated. This is just as hard to put vinyls in as it is to put a pop-up in, isn't it? If it's a locked unit, if it's a sort of, I don't mean locked, I mean legally locked unit. So we've had terrible. I think it's much harder where you've got these distant landlords, and these landlords behind a layer of agents and other names. And some of the owners, one of the particular ones where we've got 3 or 4 vacant together, which is clearly a little bit of assembly going on, just respond to us that they're registered in BVI. So that's the end of the conversation. And it's really hard because we've got 4 empty units in a row, and people point to us and say, how, why, do something about it. And that's the response back from the owner of the block. So, you know, we all come up against that. It is hard, but the pop-up stuff, if it goes ahead with, you know, if we can make this work with Westminster and a couple of, you know, if each bid does 2 or 3 of them, then you've got a real momentum to, you know, how you make it work. I don't know from other people on the other participants what success they've had with pop-up and just trying to unlock some of those units that have been vacant for so long. And then you realise why they've been vacant for so long. Neil, as your experience, how do you do that? I mean,
well, there's lots of different ways really to try and do that. But this particular project that I'm involved in is groundbreaking because it comes with some capital. So we're offering property owners money through spending money on their buildings. So we're not giving them the money, we're delivering it and organising it, specifying what work's needed, but with the property owner's permission, implementing work. So if it was a former bank, for example, which is a great example that you've given, and if we've got permission from the property owner, we could utilise some of that money on changing the frontage of the property, maybe subject to consent, other internal changes, or taking large units and looking at ways of splitting them up. And in return, this is the way the kind of model works, in return for that, the landlord will give us a period of time, 1 to 2 years, on a rent-free basis that we can then use for creating meanwhile uses, and then underletting at affordable rents to the occupiers and earning revenue through that. So it's actually a very good project because it provides what often is missing, and that's money to invest in the properties.
Yeah, and a comment there from Helen in the chat there. You know, landlords, her area of holding on for top dollar, not willing to consider any meanwhile or temporary use. That, you know, the more flexibility in this system is coming through from the more secondary areas first, as you do expect. You know, at what point will the mainstream realise, you know, the world has changed? I suppose we won't know that for a while.
No, it's always difficult. There's always going to be some property owners that don't want to engage, but properties owned by a whole mix of different people, companies, property companies, individuals, funds, and it's finding the way of just getting to those people and explaining the strategy, which is where it comes back to a place-based strategy that is seeking to make a difference, but making sure one's engaging the property owners with that. Right from the start, and then it makes it easier as you go along.
Yeah, and the sort of more prime areas are going to take longer for those discussions probably to have, because there's that expectation that you can hang on to sort of past revenues. Okay, we're getting near to the end. There are a couple of sort of technical questions here, which I'm going to put out to everybody. So please feel free to put answers in the chat. We've got Tom Swithenbank, who's asking for any advice on taking away car parking spaces. So in his area, some businesses and groups have been told it's difficult as they need to cover the parking income. So I presume this is taking away spaces for temporary use, and you know what the sort of hope is that we have more of a bounce back over summer because we can use all this space to be eating and drinking and enjoying ourselves outside. So if anyone's got the panel, they can answer that, or if anybody's got that any advice for Tom, put it in the chat. But Tom, we'll also pick that up afterwards. We will look at these questions and send you a summary email round. I'm committing you to that, Tom.
Really thorny one. I mean, we've got something as simple as, you know, a school wanting a toast rack cycle parking outside, and it involves the loss of one resident's parking bay, which could be moved. But obviously that's a really hot potato. Any movement of residence parking is a hot potato, but you're also talking about pay by phone parking, which is income to the council as well. They're really big issues, aren't they? Really, it becomes very, you know, vexed, doesn't it? Moving parking is part of the LTN discussion as well.
Yeah, so maybe again something we might want to pick up in a sort of future webinar and share some of the approaches that people have had in various areas around. We've got another one, just one more that I'm going to say again. It's a technical one. It's from Alison Herbert. The road closures have been brought in for improved social distancing. what's the impact of the end of the measures on the 21st of June? Does it mean that the temporary road orders will just end? And so again, it's another same sort of effect, really. It will have an impact on those sort of al fresco uses.
I don't know the answer to that, but I do think I'm watching the chat at the same time. Everyone wants a session on moving parking, and but let's have a parking discussion.
I know. Well, that's something I would say. With a professor of retailing, when I came into the world of place management, I realised that I might need to change my title to parking and pigeons as well. But I don't hear so much about pigeons nowadays, which is very good, which I think shows the sort of journey that place managers have been on over the last 10 years, from that very operational to the type of discussions that we've had here today, where you are managing, leading, coordinating in your local economies. I'm sure our economists had no idea how complicated the world was when you translate all this that happens at the macro level to these very micro levels. But thank you much for all our panelists. It's been absolutely fascinating. An hour and a half's just whizzed by. Really, really nice to see us take the issues from those macro all the way down to the local. And I think it's been really, really helpful. So thank you very much. Just want to say goodbye to everyone. Keep looking out for the IPM bulletin. It will tell you when the next webinar is. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.